at one point, he was asked about North Korea. And the reporter said, North Korea has played Trump really well. Why don't you do what they did? Go have this great meeting, maybe you could get some dynamic going. And Zarif looks around at him and he says, now I'm going off the record. Turn off your tape recorders. Of course, I don't, in my generation, I actually take notes. I don't use tape recorders. So here's what he said. He actually had a really good answer. Why don't you follow the North Korea example? He said there were 3 differences between North Korea and Iran. First, shaking hands with the American president is an asset for North Korea. It's a liability for an Iranian. Second, we would have to explain it to a large population of 80 million. He doesn't have to explain it to anybody. And third, he got 2 pages. We have 150 pages. He's talking about the nuclear deal. There was a global consensus against North Korea, and we have global opinion in our favor. Should Iran change in exchange for a handshake and 2 pages? He did play Trump pretty well, but he couldn't even get a declaration of peace. He was told, abandon all your missiles, stop all your enrichment, and then maybe the Americans will talk about security guarantees. We are not going to do that. Perhaps the time when he got the most animated was at the last question. It was over. The secretary announces that thing is over, but one person is still screaming to ask a question, so Zarif said, okay, one more. And it was another denunciation of Iran / question, a little question at the end. It was about, the whole thrust of it was mind-boggling. Why is Iran intervening in Yemen? And why are they causing so much suffering and violence in Yemen? And well, as what we know about who's really causing the suffering, I knew, and sure enough, this was one that really got him going. It was the first time he really broke character. That would have been one I would have liked to have on tape. It is the Saudis who are bombing school buses. They are committing crimes against humanity with American bombers. The Americans are giving air support. They're giving target support. Who is defending? Who is committing aggression? The U.S. and its allies are involved in aggression in our region. The U.S. and Israel want a group of defenseless people in our region that they can kill indiscriminately. They have the illusion that they can threaten people into committing suicide. Ain't gonna happen. That shows how American he is. You should not blame the victims for defending themselves. So with that, he finished his statement, and I was able to walk out trying to process all this. It was a fascinating opportunity to look into the mind of the Iranian government and where they stand now. I do think that Iran does have considerable sympathy in the world now, probably more than it had 6 months ago. Before Trump pulled out of the nuclear deal, I would say that skepticism about Iran and negative feelings toward Iran are probably more prevalent in government circles than they are now. Because now the U.S. position has become so extreme that it has produced a sense that although you might not like a lot of things Iran is doing, it's actually behaving in a way that's more respectful of international law and order than the United States is. So I do want to give just a few observations that would feed off the announced topic of my speech. Iran is an example of one truism I think we can say about Trump as president compared to Trump as a candidate in terms of foreign policy, and that is that Trump kept all his bad promises about foreign policy. He didn't keep any of the ones that sounded positive. You remember that a year before he was elected, he had a spectacular tweet about Afghanistan. It was a total waste. We should get out of there immediately. Now he has doubled down on the Bush-Obama policy of staying in Afghanistan permanently. And now I just read this in the Bob Woodward book. When they made this decision, first, and he sits down with his generals to talk about Afghanistan, and the first thing he does is yell at them. And he says, the soldiers on the ground could run things much better than you. They could do a much better job. I don't know what the hell we're doing. How many more deaths? How many more lost limbs? How much longer are we going to be there? This makes me realize that I do have one thing in common with Trump, and that is that we oppose the Trump administration policy on Afghanistan. After he said this, there's a discussion, and they tell him, oh, you have to do it, you can't have ungoverned space, it's Al-Qaeda, they're going to come back, and he allowed himself to be beaten down. After all, that's where all his money is coming from, and all his principal support. Coming into the meeting with one extreme view, he goes to the other opposite extreme, because the guys in uniforms told him. Iran is another place. Cuba would be the third. I think those are the three places where he really kept his bad campaign promises. He broke the one on Afghanistan. Well, it wasn't a promise, but he disappointed anybody who thought he might be able to stand up to his generals on Afghanistan. On Cuba, he also took a tremendous step backwards. The Cuba thing is particularly bizarre because the opening in Cuba was principally designed to support the private sector in Cuba. And everybody knows that the way to move from a non-democratic to a democratic regime is you've got to create a middle class. You have to have people at work that want things, that want to have a good life for themselves. All of our policies under Obama after the opening were aimed at supporting business. We were promoting individual businesses in Iran. There were thousands, literally thousands of Airbnbs. Many of those are now closing. The people in the construction business who are fixing them up don't have work anymore. It used to be, under the Obama rules, you could get on a plane and go to Cuba. And you could see what you wanted to see. Now, under the Trump rules, you can only go on a government-sponsored bus tour that's going to take you where they want to what they want to show you. It's so self-defeating. Iran is another place where I think Trump kept a bad promise. During the campaign, he kept attacking the Iran deal with 100% certainty he has never read it. I mean, it's 150 pages. But if he could get it down to one page, I'm sure he wouldn't read it either. He's against it for one reason and one reason only, and that is that it was Obama that did it. That's the only possible reason. This deal is so much in the security interest of the United States. In the international relations circles, it's almost a parlor game after a drink or two. One of the subjects we like to wonder about is how did the intensity against Iran in America reach this level? I mean, there's other countries that we never liked. I mean, we hated Red China, and we hated Russia, Soviet Union, Cuba. But it didn't rise to this level. The vituperative vocabulary, the intensity of the threats, the lack of interest in even hiding what our long-term project in Iran is unique. It can't be explained by Iran's actions. Iran's actions you could interpret them in certain ways that would lead America to think that we don't like them. But with all countries, even when we have security differences, we might think, well, maybe there are also some areas where we could work together. And how did the Iran thing reach this surreal level of intensity? One theory is that it's still a hangover from the hostage crisis and the loss of our Shah. We really did feel that we owned Iran. If you go back to the loss of China, it was the same kind of thing. We never expected that to happen. And the idea that the communists could win on their own just seemed impossible, so something must have happened that created this horrible situation. We've never been able to adjust to the fact that the country that was our principal base in the whole broader Middle East slipped away from us and became a hostile force. Also, it's true that many of the people now in our foreign policy establishment are just at the age to remember the hostage crisis and this humiliation. I think there's a sense that they hit us, and we actually never got to hit them back. They got away with it, and we have to crush them first and teach them a lesson. It really is a a sense of how the United States and other countries do this too. You build up to a tremendous intensity the stories of the bad things that have been done to you. And you ignore all the other side of what you might have done to someone else. Another theory about why the Iran situation got to be so intense is that it's driven by Israel and Saudi Arabia. And I think there is a lot to this. I suspect that if one day the Israelis would come to Washington and for whatever reason say, well, we've made a peace with Iran. We don't hate Iran anymore. We get along with it. I think the air would go out of the anti-Iran bubble in Washington overnight. Most of those people can't find Iran on a map. It's just a concept. I can't imagine that could happen anytime soon. But I really do believe that that is an important part of it. Nonetheless, this is such an unequal confrontation. Iran is older and is in that area. But Iran's economy now is about the size of the economy of Connecticut. So it's not much of a choice when countries are forced to choose between either doing business with Iran and doing business with the United States. I'm really worried about the future of our campaign against Iran. It's obvious to me that there's a few people in Washington, particularly our National Security Advisor and our Secretary of State, who did not come into office in order to finish their terms with that government still in power in Iran. I'm not here for that. I'm here because on my watch, I want to see that thing finally happen. Now, inside Iran, I think it is true. There's a lot of unhappiness with their government, much of it well justified. But in America, that unhappiness with the government is confused with, we want to overthrow our government. That's not what it's about. They want their government to be better. They want them to behave better, to be more responsive, and to be more honest. But it's not about wanting to overthrow everything and ask the Americans who they would like to put in. And of course, we have this murderous cult, the Mujahideen cult, now cheerleaded by Rudy Giuliani, that we have waiting in line. This is an organization that has assassinated Iranian leaders and even sided with Iraq in the Iraq-Iran war. So you can imagine how popular they are in Iran. This is our fantasy for the future. I do think that much of what we're doing in Iran has to do with trying to provoke Iran to respond. You saw this terrorist attack that happened a week ago in Abbas, where terrorists opened fire on a parade. I think those kinds of episodes are designed to evoke a response from Iran, so we could then say, Iran did this terrible thing, we have to attack them. I noticed that the United States has just closed one of its consulates in Iraq, because they say it's under danger from pro-Iran forces. It's like 16 years after we invaded Iraq, we still are not safe enough to even open up a consul. So you can see that the situation there is intensifying. I feel, certainly didn't get the sense from Zarif, we're rethinking this whole thing, we're cowering in the corner now, we're desperate, please throw us a lifeline. They don't see it that way. I think he's right that Iran does have a pretty broad coalition of international support. Whether that can be transformed into something that will change the dynamic in the United States, I don't know. But that leads me to my final point I want to talk about, which is where might we go from here? So where are we, particularly in Washington? There has been this week a resolution introduced in Congress that would require the permission of Congress in case the United States wants to go to war against Iran. I'm for that. If I were a congressman, I'd vote for it, but I wonder why it's necessary, because I read the Constitution, and it says that the president can't go to war without permission of Congress. Now it's highly controversial to offer a bill in Congress saying you can't go to war without our permission. It's just a quote from the Constitution, but even that is far-fetched. I think in Washington, there's no percentage to seeming to sympathize with Iran or to suggest that the United States might want to do a little bit less in the world. everything is about more, more, more. You want to go bomb 5 countries, I'm going to bomb 7 countries. You want to increase the defense budget by 10%, I'm going to increase it by 15%. That's the competition. There's very little talk about the opposite. You know, in political campaigns, you always hear about how I'm going to handle this war or that war. The word peace almost never comes up in American political campaigns. What is your plan to make the world a more peaceful place? Nobody's ever asked that in American politics. And the climate in Washington doesn't encourage it. All the Democrats, all the Republicans, all the think tanks, and most shamefully for me, all of the press, with few exceptions, is all on the same bandwagon. So in Washington, it's difficult to build that opposition coalition. Nonetheless, I think there are some signs of hope. The war in Yemen has become a focal point in Washington, and the outrages are so intense and so impossible to ignore that they are drawing people into some skepticism about the war in Yemen. And as you know, that war could not be happening without us. So it's our airplanes, and we're refueling the planes in air, which the Saudis can't do themselves. And we're choosing the targets. So who figured out that the school bus would be a great thing to bomb? It wasn't some Saudi. They don't do targeting. We do targeting. So 26 members of Congress are now signed on to a bill asking for withdrawal of U.S. support for the Saudis, for the Saudi war effort, which would mean the end to that war. Now, it's interesting. I know the little group, Just Foreign Policy, that's from which this project springs. Their normal effort is to go to Congress and find some powerful and effective member to grab onto their bill. They couldn't find it. The Democratic leaders would not do it. Nancy Pelosi doesn't want to touch anything like this. So they went another route. They found a nobody. They found a freshman congressman from California, Ro Khanna, to introduce this. They've gone around it, and he's been building up support. And just this week, Steny Hoyer, the deputy to Nancy Pelosi, has signed on. So I think there's broadening support there. The Afghanistan one, I have always thought would be the best way to start, since everybody in America recognizes that the Afghanistan war isn't going well. Not everyone would agree we should withdraw, but the generals are completely out of ideas for Afghanistan. We have tried everything and it didn't work. And we're now trying to accomplish with 7,000 troops what we couldn't accomplish with 120,000 troops. So I've always thought in a political campaign, a great question is, will you pull us out of Afghanistan? But now I'm thinking, for this campaign, even better is Yemen. The Yemen war is right in our face. And it's a horrific example of what the United States does in the world, and it's a perfect place to focus energy. So I'm thinking this really is, particularly in the period between now and the election and in the beginning of the next Congress, a real important key. And now I read a fascinating analysis of the Kavanaugh, the politics around the Kavanaugh nomination in Washington. And it said this: the Republicans feel that by sticking with him and pushing ahead and pushing him through, which I think they're going to do, they shore up their base. If they give in, their base will think they're wimps and there's no reason to come out. And this is going to help them in their Senate elections. They've got several very close Senate races, and they think they can force even a couple of Democratic senators in conservative states. They'll have to vote for Kavanaugh. However, they also recognize that as they think this will help their Senate campaigns, they know it's going to kill them in the House. And it's, as one Washington insider was quoted saying in this article, it suggests that the Republicans have understood they're going to lose the House. But they're going to hang on to the Senate, and they'll have their wild man on the Supreme Court for the next 50 years. So what does it mean they're going to lose the House? Let me just point out a couple of things. Adam Smith is a congressman from Washington State. He is on this Yemen project full bore. He is also the highest ranking Democrat on the House Foreign Affairs Committee. He will become the chairman of the House Foreign Affairs Committee. The same is true in the House Armed Services Committee. The leading Democrat on the House Armed Services Committee is a strong opponent of American bombing in other countries. And then finally, the place where a lot of these resolutions get bottled up and die is the House Rules Committee. That's the place where whenever you have a resolution, you want to, like for the authorization of the use of military force, that's about a rule, it gets sent to the Rules Committee, and the Rules Committee kills it. The next chairman of the House Rules Committee, if the Democrats take the House, is going to be Jim McGovern. He's going to be a baron of the House. And he is loaded for bear on these issues. So a transition in the House of Representatives is going to be a big deal. Maybe not for Trump administration policy, but for creating a counter-narrative. There are going to be hearings on things there are never hearings about now. It's going to be a big change in policy. And I think it has some replay back here in Massachusetts because we have 3 members of Congress from Massachusetts who have signed on to the resolution that we should stop supporting the war in Iraq. 3. It should be every one. So Joe Kennedy, Jim McGovern, always reliable, and Mike Capuano.
Yeah.
I'm telling you, we have a job to do with Diana Presley. She's a work in progress. I don't know how much she's captured by one group or another, but this is something for Bostonians who are interested in peace. We can't let her slide away. She replaced one of the most outspoken opponents of U.S. aggression abroad in the whole U.S. Congress. And whether you think that was good or bad, it's incumbent on her and incumbent on us in Boston not to let this seat slide back into the hands of someone who doesn't care about the rest of the world and is just going to instinctively vote with the mass of the Democratic Party. So that, to me, is a huge challenge for us. We need a completely new approach to foreign policy. We must reassess our security imperatives in a profound way. We have security needs, but what are they? We've way over defined our vital interests. You know, every country has vital interests. And the difference between interests and vital interests is vital interests are the ones you want to go to war for. That means you should have as few as possible. But we tell ourselves we have vital interests in every single part of the world, everywhere. So naturally we're ready to go to war all the time. We need to reassess what our security imperatives really are. We need to return to a policy of international cooperation rather than confrontation. We need to stop our endless wars and begin to dismantle the empire of bases that we have all around the world. We need a foreign policy that's built on the concern for workers and the environment, not just in the United States, but around the world. And I think there is the prospect for a coming together of groups that disagree on other issues, on these foreign policy issues. So the groups that are the strongest in opposition to the American imperial project in the 21st century, I see as 3. One of them is a group of professionals and academics in the international relations business who consider themselves what we call realists. The realist school of international